All right. Good afternoon. My name is Evan Heisman. I work in the Office of Parent and Family Programs here at Duke. We're excited today for DukeEngage, the inside story from students and staff. Today, I'm going to pass it over to Inga Peterson, the Associate Director of Operations for DukeEngage. And she's going to introduce herself, a few for students, and they're going to speak for a while. And then we will be taking a Q&A session towards the end. Please be sure to message me directly your questions, and we will be reading those off at the end. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Inga now. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. So, one moment. Ignore the woman behind the screen for a minute, as I am going to share my screen with you.
Detroit 2015 program.
Participated in DukeEngage Nicaragua.
I did DukeEngage Cape Town.
DukeEngage partner with the DukeEngage Chicago program.
Inaugural DukeEngage Paraguay program.
Project in Providence, Rhode Island.
Engage Ahmedabad, India program in the summer of 2018.
DukeEngage Detroit. In 2012, and I went to Bangladesh to work for an organization called Friendship.
DukeEngage is an opportunity for faculty members and students to work together with communities on projects of community interest.
Going through learning about these programs, I'm like, this is everything I could have dreamed of. Like, I want to be out there in the world making a difference.
I've taken over 80 students to villages in Togo, and most of them have come back transformed from the experience.
I'm still in touch with so many of the other Duke students that I participated with. I even just joined the board of the nonprofit that I interned with during my DukeEngage.
It really blew open what I thought dance could do. I realized it was a totally new language that I could communicate with others who maybe we couldn't speak, or we could speak in broken languages, but we knew what we were saying when we were dancing together.
The real way to make an impact in the world is not for us to come in with our solutions. The real way to make an impact in the world is for us to come alongside and see how to help and learn.
A real hands-on experience in communities, working with community organizations that have decades of rootedness in those places.
If I had to describe DukeEngage in 3 words, I would say eye-opening,
Immersive,
Community,
Memorable,
challenging,
Meaningful.
Life-changing.
actionable.
Human. The DukeEngage experience, simply put, was a human experience.
Okay, so that was our new video that we just put together with the help of our faculty and former participants, one of whom, Clarice, who you'll be meeting in a little bit, gave us a lot of good footage, and we appreciate that. So, let me get started here. Okay, so first of all, I want to say thank you to Evan and to Grace and to the whole Family Weekend team. I can't imagine what it's been like trying to do all of this virtually. And I really appreciate the opportunity on behalf of our staff and our students and our program directors and community partners to talk with you today a little bit about DukeEngage. I also really appreciate that you all came today to the session. As a mom myself, I can't imagine what Family Weekend is like without being able to be with your students. So I know that's a huge disappointment. So we're grateful to have you today, and also grateful for your interest in DukeEngage. I also want to thank my student panelists who are with me today. I'm joined by 4 of them. Hadil Hamoud, who is a junior majoring in political science and international comparative studies. She participated in our Jordan program. And then I'm pretty sure I have 3 seniors. Clarice, who I mentioned before, who's a biology major who participated in our Peru program. Eritrea Temesgen, a public policy and sociology major from our Miami program. And Nathan Heffernan, also a public policy major who participated in our San Francisco program. So I'm sure you're all much more interested in hearing from them. But first, I'm just going to spend a few minutes kind of outlining the basics of the program for you. As if we were in the middle of a traditional year, which we're not, and I don't want to bury the lead. We don't know what this summer is going to look like, so let me just say that up front. But I'm going to talk to you about sort of the basics of the program, and then also give you a little bit of a snapshot of what happened with us this summer, as I'm guessing the summer coming up will be similar to the one this summer. So first, some numbers. For a little bit of background, this is our 14th year, for 12 of which we've topped the list of reasons prospective students give for their interest in Duke. And as of this summer, just under 5,000 Duke students have worked with more than 600 community partners in 84 nations, 46 US cities, logging over 1.5 million hours of work in their communities. To give you a sense of the broad-reaching scope of DukeEngage on campus, in the last 5 years alone, our participants have represented 55 majors, minors, and certificates from 51 different departments. So what is DukeEngage really? So let me dive in and give you some background on what the program's about. So first and foremost, DukeEngage is an immersive summer opportunity during which students and faculty collaborate with communities locally and globally, to address critical social issues. So what do we mean by that? By immersive, we really mean that students position themselves within a community that they really get to know, not from the perspective of a tourist, but as someone participating in and taking time to understand the everyday life of the community. By collaborating, we mean working with, not for, not in service of, but with local organizations, many of whom have been our community partners for years, and some even for over a decade. And finally, how do we identify critical social issues? We don't. Our partnerships are community driven, meaning that we work on issues that are that community members have identified as important to them, not on issues that we think need to be addressed. So the goal really is reciprocal, sustainable relationships through which students are working side by side to address these critical issues, side by side with program directors and community members. Students achieve this goal in addition to the work through training and reflection sessions, which are a core component of the DukeEngage program. The work's done through an experiential learning process, which is learning through reflecting on doing, taking time to really understand the expertise and experience of those with whom they're engaging, and thinking about what they're doing and why it all matters. So like mentioned in the slide, really turning experience into knowledge. So we use the training and reflection really to help support students as they think about connection between purpose, action, consequence, change. So let's talk about the structure of the program for a few minutes and what it actually looks like on the ground. So first of all, the program is really meant to be as accessible as possible to as many students as possible. It's a fully funded summer, meaning that all expenses are covered: airfare, room and board, vaccines, medications related to travel, that's all covered. In addition to that, for students who are on financial aid, their summer earnings requirement is waived for the summer that they participate in DukeEngage. So there are two different tracks into which a student can opt. We have group programs both in the US and abroad. Approximately 2/3 of our programs are international and 1/3 are US based. I should note that some of your students may be aware of our independent project option. And I should say here that while we will probably be offering virtual independent project options this summer, if we're able to go back to in-person programs, the independent project in person won't be an option available to students this year. There are just too many health and safety considerations for us to feel comfortable sending students out across the globe or even across the US at this point to do an independent project. Our group programs are run by program directors, most of whom are faculty, some of senior staff run programs. These program directors are at a site. They are the ones who bring the community partnership to the table. And they're at our sites for at least 2 weeks of the 8-week experience at the beginning to get everybody settled. Many of them stay longer than that, and some of them stay the entire 8 weeks. But in any case, each program has a site coordinator that we hire who's on site with the students for the entirety of the 8-week program. And they are the person in charge of logistics, but also running the reflection program and just being in community with students and with the partners as well. So students who join the program commit to 8 weeks plus. And what I mean by that is that while the DukeEngage experience takes place over 8 weeks in the summer, students commit to substantial pre-departure training, which takes place over the course of the preceding spring, and includes, this year, it included a month of week-long workshops and additional program-specific meetings run by program directors. Again, with the goal that students really be able to critically examine what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why it all matters. All first, second, and third year students are eligible to apply for DukeEngage. Seniors aren't eligible for 2 reasons related to resources. One is that we want students to finish an experience like this to be able to have access to resources on campus as they process and think through what this experience has meant or not meant to them. And the other thing is we want them to be resources to the campus community as well. You know, when you have a group of individuals who spent so much time thinking about purpose and community, you want to have access to those people back on campus as well. So that means that any student who applies has to be planning to return to campus for at least a semester in order to be eligible. We get asked a lot, when is the right time to participate in DukeEngage? There's no right time to apply. It truly just depends on the individual student. About half of our students apply to do it after their sophomore year, with a quarter each after their first and their junior years. However, this is not something that we select for. There's no priority given by year. Some want to do it right away and use their experience to inform their time at Duke. And for others, it's just the opposite. They want time to explore interest, refine their skills, and then apply to DukeEngage as sort of a capstone opportunity. So the program is highly selective. The numbers here are our pre-COVID numbers for this summer. We receive upwards of about 1,000 applications each year for about 400 spots. So these numbers were about what we were expecting. This makes students nervous. This may make your students nervous as you're talking to them. However, I don't think the number really reflects the reality as they do vary from program to program. I don't know if I mentioned before that we have between 8 and 12 students in a program, and some of them are more competitive than others. What we tell students, rather than focusing on how competitive a program is, to focus on making themselves as competitive as possible, meaning choosing a program that is well suited to their interests and skills. So what did happen in 2020? So there's definitely no such thing as a typical DukeEngage summer. Each year has its own stories, perspectives, projects, and personalities, but DukeEngage 2020 was certainly a summer like no other. I realize everyone is saying that about their summer. When we received confirmation at the end of March, basically that all Duke sponsored travel was canceled, our team pivoted quickly to virtual programming. Working with program leaders, students, community partners, we were able to put forward 14 group programs and 43 independent projects funding 106 participants this summer. So what did that look like? As I mentioned, we had 14 group programs led by faculty directors, including this project in Paraguay. So initially, Christine Fulch, who actually spoke in the video about partnerships, and Luana Lima, they're in cultural anthropology and energy and the environment respectively, proposed a new joint program in Brazil and Paraguay. And so the original goal of the project was to bring together two groups of students, one in Brazil and one in Paraguay, to make recommendations regarding the Itaipu Dam, which is the world's second largest operational hydroelectric power plant. So the dam and the renewable energy that it produces is jointly owned by the two nations under a treaty that's set to expire in 2023. So during the 8-week program, the DukeEngage teams were to partner with local educational institutions to understand how the treaty's renegotiation could advance sustainable development in both countries. So when in-person programs were canceled, Professor Fulch and her partners in Paraguay pivoted to a virtual project focused on post-pandemic recovery. So 6 of our students opted in, working remotely to analyze COVID's impact and Latin America's response, and to develop proposals focused on social, political, and economic sustainability. As a final project, they created a website and a report that you see part of the report there on the slide that outlines lessons from the crisis and makes recommendations on developing resiliency in a couple of markets: digital infrastructure, education, health, and the economy. And the recommendations included building 2 teaching hospitals in the underserved interior of the country, investing in hydrogen fuel cell manufacturing, and expanding the National Credit Union. So the group was able to share their findings in a Facebook Live event that they co-hosted with their research partner that drew over 1,000 people and was featured on the national news in Paraguay. And I just spoke to a student who participated in the program a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the president of Paraguay had actually been asked about this particular report during a news broadcast. So the students were all excited about the impact that they were able to have, even though they weren't in Paraguay in person. The pivot meant that many of our group programs couldn't run. And I show you these projects from these 2 students as well, because I think they'll be similar to what's going to happen this summer. Our students really met the moment by working with partners and our staff to design independent projects. So we ended up with 43 independent projects, including the 2 here. Jack had been accepted to our program in Rwanda, which is a project that provides farm-grown meals to hospitals. Hospitals in Rwanda don't normally feed their patients. To help combat malnutrition and improve health outcomes of patients in the hospital. Instead, he ended up working remotely with the Milwaukee Economic Development Corporation, which is a nonprofit that provides short-term, low-interest loans for both Milwaukee and Waukesha businesses. He rebuilt their website and worked on a grant that was a partnership between the city and the organization to help local businesses impacted by COVID. Annie switched from working with our WISER program in Kenya, which is focused on secondary education for girls, to a project with her local school district in which she formed a diversity and equity committee and developed curricula for her school district related to equity, multicultural education, social emotional learning, and anti-racist education. I mentioned these 2 projects again because they were indicative of last summer's projects, and I think probably will be for this summer as well. And one anticipated outcome, honestly, with our programs our projects this summer, was that many of our participants chose to work remotely with nonprofits in their hometowns. And this meant that more students were really engaged in issues in their own communities than usually happens with the DukeEngage program. So I'm going to turn it over to the students in a minute here, but I just want to say in closing, every summer we survey our students. And honestly, I think we were all a bit skeptical about how this summer was going to go. If for no other reason than social change is predicated upon the idea of having interpersonal relationships, face-to-face relationships that help drive agendas forward. And without that, we really weren't sure what it was going to look like. These numbers here, I think, really speak to the DukeEngage factor. 89% of students thinking about additional community engagement opportunities, 63 who might possibly consider changing their career path, 72 who would think about taking more classes related to their experience. And I think that those numbers, really demonstrate how community collaboration and immersion opportunities like this really yield an impact that begins to unfold over a lifetime. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to leave it to my students here. Nathan, you are up.
Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Nathan. I'm a senior. I'm just going to start a timer. I'm a senior at Duke studying public policy, and I did the DukeEngage San Francisco program. So I chose this program, so it's a domestic program, and I think that's the first choice a student will have to make, is whether it's domestic or international, because international deadlines are like a month earlier. So I wanted to do domestic one because I wanted to be paired with a existing nonprofit like in the US. I know like I was familiar with other domestic programs, and like it seemed like the experiences people had was really positive. So definitely narratives from other students is what swayed me. So in San Francisco, the DukeEngage program is centered on helping homeless LGBTQ youth. The partner organization that I worked with was Larkin Street Youth Services, which is like the largest homeless shelter provider in the Bay Area, or like that general area for homeless youth, mainly ages 18 to 25. So that's like the category of youth. So the community partner is Larkin. My day-to-day involved a combination of administrative work, like a regular internship that you'd expect like at a nonprofit. Often nonprofits, though, they can't fund internships for students. So DukeEngage provided that opportunity, which is really good. And the other half of it was really interpersonal work, hanging out with clients who are kind of my age, and I guess running workshops, helping with GED tutoring. I got to run my own workshops regarding like mental health and other issues. And then I also got to do a lot of advocacy work on behalf of Larkin Street or with Larkin Street with a student leadership committee or a youth leadership board. I got to help them draft public statements and to advocate on behalf of Larkin Street as a nonprofit to get more funding from the public and from the city, as I'll show you in some pictures in a bit. As far as my major, I'm a public policy major, which is a major that's kind of unique to Duke. I don't like other schools don't really have like an undergrad public policy because it kind of seems kind of new, but generally you learn about policy and analysis and how systems work, solutions, how to analyze choices that our elected officials make, and how to solve problems is how I liked to think about it. I'm also pre-med, so I'm planning on going to med school. So that's another thing I think a lot of Duke students apparently are like interested in. It's what I've heard. So I'm just reading off some guidelines. So some takeaways I had from my experience. I had a lot of takeaways from being in San Francisco and for working for a nonprofit. So the first takeaway that I really appreciated was learning how a nonprofit worked and getting an in-depth look at that. That's something that's pretty guaranteed. And it was really interesting and cool and everything expected, but parts of it were also like really eye-opening. Larkin Street's located in the Tenderloin, which is it's one of the highest concentrations of unhoused people in the US. And when you visit, it's pretty obvious. It's known by people as like a dangerous area or like an unsafe area, but overall it's almost a safe haven for people experiencing homelessness in a way. And Larkin Street is there and is another safe haven for youth experiencing homelessness who have suffered other problems, who have probably have years of trauma and other life issues leading them to the point of when they walk in the doors, and people at Larkin, and I guess also the DukeEngage interns were able to help them. So the first takeaway I had was really a firsthand perspective of what nonprofit work looks like, why it's as draining as everyone says it is, emotionally, time-wise, and why it's really good work, but that's extremely tiring with a lot of contradictions. And learning all about those, there was no way I was going to get that from a class. There's just so in that way, it was incredibly educative. It taught me a lot about social systems, about what social change meant, what it looked like, how difficult it is, balancing caring for members of your community and fighting for larger change, that having those daily interactions as well as advocating for big picture things, because both feel like they don't address the other. So finding the bridge between those definitely had helped with not seeing social issues as an academic subject, seeing it more as something around me, something connected with me and my communities. So no, in the idea of poverty, the idea of homelessness no longer were like bolded points in a textbook. They were things that happened to real people, real stories, people that I met, that I connected to, that I made friendships with. So it really categorized everything extremely different for me. The third takeaway I want to talk about is being in San Francisco. So a great thing about DukeEngage is that there's always a cultural aspect to it. So you have weekend trips that are weekend excursions where you like learn about a piece of the culture of the country or the city that you are in. San Francisco has a lot. San Francisco is an extremely diverse city, and it's the the birthplace of a lot of different social justice movements, especially gay rights movement, trans rights movement as well, and other interesting historic events that have happened in different neighborhoods. Each neighborhood has a completely different culture, and a lot of our weekend excursions centered around that, going to different neighborhoods. So that part really taught me a lot about the history of San Francisco, but also the history of queer history. And a big component was helping homeless LGBTQ youth, since LGBTQ youth are disproportionately affected by homelessness. They're seen a lot more, and they represent a huge chunk of the homeless population in comparison to how many LGBTQ youth are out there. So that was a really good way to bridge an aspect of my identity, I'm gay, with what I was doing. So that was really powerful. And I grew up in Texas, in a suburb of Texas outside Houston. So I hadn't really had any exposure to what being queer meant, what queer history, like in person. I didn't know anyone queer over the age of like 20. I had none of that experience. So going to San Francisco really taught me a lot around people I worked, around opportunities I had. The Castro district is an extremely historic district. If you've ever seen the movie Milk with Sean Penn, that shows a lot about early days of San Francisco gay history. So that was a extremely cool part. Two things I want to briefly talk, just because these are mostly probably a lot of parents. The two things they mentioned: full funding. So one challenge I had was using the funding, but a really good skill, because living in an expensive city on a smaller budget and cooking for myself was an important skill that I had to have and develop. So big life lessons and all around. And then the safety was something that we thought about before, but I don't think I was ever concerned. I mean, I think all cities have all types of people. There's no reason to characterize one place as more dangerous than another for some reason. And I felt pretty safe, and I felt really at home in San Francisco the entire time. So now I'm going to show briefly a few pictures of my time to give even more of a, okay. I'm assuming everyone can see that. Okay, so here is that's me wearing my DukeEngage shirt, so perfect poster child picture. Here is one of our first excursions was a tour around the city in this van. It was really fun. We got to see all the different neighborhoods. That's just me posing in front of some bridge, or I don't know. The picture on the left is, these are all other people that participated in the program with me. The picture on the left is one of us in the Castro district. It's the historic gay district of San Francisco. We're just getting lunch, and there's rainbow flags everywhere. And there's a Castro theater, extremely historic theater. The one on the right is from our field trip to Alcatraz, where we learned a lot about the history of incarceration in San Francisco, as well as a pretty interesting indigenous movement, activism movement that happened at Alcatraz, which I did not know about before. So that's a really interesting aspect. Top left is that's just like a flyer from the center for a queer people of color support group that I got to it. I attended one with some other youth, and that was just a really cool opportunity to talk to people about what it's like to be a queer person of color. The one on the right is me and another DukeEngage. We did a hike for the other partner organization that the other students. So a lot of the domestic ones, students will pair at different organizations. So I was at Larkin, but other people are another one called At the Crossroads, and they had a fundraiser that was basically a hike, and this is us there volunteering and helping out. The left is me speaking at a public hearing, advocating for more funding for Larkin Street, giving a speech about it, using what I had learned and whatnot. Right is me at the Castro Theater. That's the gay district. That's me smiling because I'm happy. These are pictures at Pride. Our nonprofit had a booth for queer youth, or not a booth, like a giant area, and we volunteered and we ran it, and we also got to walk around. More cultural things. On the right is the AIDS walk. That was another thing our nonprofit worked with as well, and we got to volunteer at and participate in. And here is the whole team that worked at Larkin Street, the one that I was at. A great place, very special to me. So that's it. I'm going to pass it over to Clarice. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Clarice. I'm studying biology and computer science here at Duke, and I did DukeEngage in Peru. So my decision to apply to DukeEngage was kind of based on a broad and rather lopsided understanding of the program. All I knew was that I wanted to participate in service work for an extended period of time and to get to experience a new culture. But I didn't know that there would be so many other aspects of growth and learning involved. So that being said, I ultimately applied to an international program to fulfill that desire to immerse myself in a new culture. And I decided on a group program because I didn't think I was ready to do all the work and like travel alone. But I do think that my like sort of naivete about the specifics of DukeEngage turned out to be useful because it allowed me to keep my options open when looking at projects to apply for. And so I didn't have that much experience in terms of the specific topic areas for the project in Peru, but I was drawn to the program structure, the emphasis on community, and the vibrancy of the Peruvian culture. So the goals of the program in Peru were to support community development, environmental conservation, and preservation of traditional weaving practices in Andean communities. So we worked on multiple projects over the summer with 2 partner organizations, the Centro Bartolomé de las Casas and the Nature Conservancy. So the longer project involved developing a management plan for revitalizing and preserving an ancient laguna. And we spent a good chunk of time picking up trash and removing harmful algae and building a fence around the little watershed. And the other project was at an elementary school where we built a greenhouse and a warm house to promote eco-friendly practices in education. Overall, I'm really proud of the work that we did there, but I recognize that it probably didn't significantly change anything in the grand scheme of things. However, I now better understand that civic engagement is longitudinal, so hopefully our cohort was just the first of many that will contribute to the program in Peru. On a regular day, we would leave our hostel around 7:15 and we would work early in the morning because the sun in Peru would just beat down on you and it was really unpleasant. And so after around like 1 or 2, then we would have lunch with our community partners in a community member's home. And then we would return to Cusco and have workshops and we would do debates and reflection sessions. And we also took Spanish lessons. When we weren't working on projects, we were able to, like Nathan mentioned, like learn a lot about Peruvian culture and traditions. So we were lucky enough to be able to be in Cusco during Inti Raymi, which is one of their most important festivals of the year. And then we were invited to participate in a Peruvian parade for the organization. And then I also was able to see Machu Picchu on my birthday, so I'll never forget that. So yeah, DukeEngage gave me what I had hoped for originally, service and international experience. But as I've alluded to, like that's not it at all. So 2 of the most important things that I learned were the importance of relationships and then reflection. So I have a funny story. Early on in the summer, I took on the very important role of chief snack officer. So every day it was my job to venture to the local market and buy snacks to fuel our work. And we were at high altitude, so everybody was just always tired. I would regularly buy giant wheels of Andean cheese, a variety of bread, large avocados, and sometimes even cake. And each day I would actually ask somebody different in my cohort to help me. And as silly as the role sounds, this gave me a lot of one-on-one time with members of the team. And it was key in allowing me to form a lot of the strong friendships that I made there. And at one point, the ladies at the market actually began to recognize me and they would wrap up my cheese wheel and my bread rolls without me even asking. And that really made me feel like I was a member of the community. So another part of the program is reflection. As part of the pre-departure training, all DukeEngage participants will explore a variety of topics. And these first sessions at Duke led to further ones during the summer about a lot of things and including like possible pitfalls of DukeEngage. And I think it was really valuable to grapple with these ideas together as a group. So since returning to Duke, I think it's safe to say that I'm a hand raiser for all things related to DukeEngage. In other words, I feel so passionately and am so grateful for the program that I'm always eager to be involved, whether that be through leading the pre-departure sessions or being here with you all today. But it also strongly prompted my efforts in becoming an increasingly engaged citizen and trying to enact social change. This past summer, I participated in another program associated with DukeEngage called the Broadhead Service Program, which allowed me to pursue a second summer of community engagement work. And like Inga mentioned, I actually picked a reproductive health nonprofit in my hometown. And so it allowed me to interweave my interest in civic engagement and health. Fast forward to now, I'm actually taking a class about civic engagement and social change. And I've sought out even more ways to be engaged, like through research on health inequities and policy with Fast Connections and political engagement with Duke Votes. So I really could go on for hours about DukeEngage. I'm really proud of the work that we did, and it's given me some of my most cherished friends and prompted a lot of personal development and growth. It lit a fire within me and defined my Duke path in countless ways. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to share some photos. So, okay. So this was the first day of the academy that we did after finals, and we had to take this horribly awkward photo. And it makes me laugh every time I see this. And so the picture on the left here is one of the first weeks that we had in Peru, and we were doing like the mandatory team bonding exercises. So this was human knot. And this on the right is a contrast. So later in the program, we would voluntarily form human knots after like a long day at work. And so these pictures both show different sessions that we did over the summer. The one on the left, we were learning about how to teach young children about environmental conservation and just about like eco-friendly practices and how to teach children in schools. And then on the right, that was a Quechua lesson that we had. So that's another language that a lot of people in Cusco speak, and it was really difficult. So this was a day we spent picking up trash with a local school. And then after the activity, we just started playing soccer with them, and it was really fun. This was a special day that we had where we were working with some of like the dyeing of wool that they do like every so often. And so we're also able to harvest potatoes. And Peru is actually home to over 4,000 types of potatoes. So it was really cool to be able to see some of the really interesting ones, like unique potatoes, like here on the left, my friend and I are holding these like orange potatoes with pink like speckles on them. It was really unique. And so this was the wool dyeing that we helped with. So they take alpaca or sheep wool and they use natural things that they find. Like I think they use like these parasites on cactus leaves to dye things red. And here on the right is my friend wearing a DukeEngage shirt with a little girl braiding her hair. And this was one of the education workshops where my friend here is showing a video to the young students in the school. And this was the project where we were trying to fix up this watershed. It's called Media Luna. So that means like half moon, and it was shaped like that. And then we spent a lot of time just like using these long rakes to rake up the algae. And then we were going to build a fence around it. And so here's me trying to dig a hole for a fence post. And then on the right, this is a fence post that we ended up putting into the ground. And then on the left, that's me with our bus driver, Wilbur, and I was helping him build watia, which is a traditional way of cooking potatoes. Basically, you build this like igloo out of clay, dirt, rocks, and you heat it up, and then you put the potatoes inside. And that's the last day of us working at the school to build the main frame for the greenhouse. And this was actually the last day of work, so it was a happy and sad day. Yep, and that's all I have. Thank you for listening, and I'm gonna pass it to Eritrea.
Thank you, Clarice. Hey everyone, my name is Eritrea Temeskin. I'm a senior and I'm currently pursuing an interdepartmental major in sociology and public policy, a Spanish minor and human rights certificate. So I'm actually going to share my screen as I talk because I like to have visuals to help me go along. So here this is. Okay, so I did Duke Engage in Miami in the summer of 2018, which was the summer after my first year at Duke. And I actually had known nothing about Duke Engage before I got to Duke. I applied on a whim based on recommendations from friends in my high school. And so I got to a week and people were like, Duke Engage, and it was like everywhere. I didn't really know what it was about. But as I learned more throughout a week in the year, I thought it was interesting, but I saw a lot of conversation about the international programs, and I had a few reservations about doing a short-term service project in another country that I probably didn't know much about. And so I didn't give it much more thought until later in the year after the application process for the international programs ended. And I got an email about the US-based programs. And so I just thought, okay, I'll just like browse through the options. And my eyes immediately went to Duke Engage in Miami because it said that the focus of the program was strengthening immigrant communities. And, I come from an immigrant family. My name is Eritrea, which is the country my family's from. And so I, have always been passionate about migrant justice and, the politics of citizenship and, the resources that are necessary to help migrant communities thrive in, various diasporas. And so I thought it was really cool that Duke Engage had a US-based program about, migrant communities. And so I decided to go ahead and apply, and I went through the application and interview process, and thankfully I was accepted. So this is from the Duke Engage Academy before we started the program. This is us throwing up the 305, which is the zip code from Miami. It was a really interesting dynamic because we didn't really know each other. So kind of like Chris was saying about that picture out front of Marketplace, it was a bit awkward, but I think it was an important time to kind of start building those relationships that we would have throughout the summer. And it was also a really important time for me to start thinking about, my position as someone who, yes, I'm from the US, but have never been to Miami before. I don't really know the dynamics and the demographics there and the history there. And so being very self-aware and intentional about learning as much as I could and bring a very intentional perspective to my work there. So I think that was a really important academy, important time to also learn from our program directors and our on-site coordinator. And they were all very helpful in kind of helping us build that groundwork before going to Miami. This picture is from our first day out as a group in Miami. It was a really cool day because we basically, all 9 of us, plus the on-site coordinator, got crammed into a van, and he just drove us around Miami and gave us a history of it. And so as we passed different historic places and places he was familiar with, as someone who grew up in Miami, he would tell us about this, the stories. We went to Little Havana, Little Haiti. We learned about just the very, very diverse and vibrant communities that exist in Miami. Is actually known as the capital of Latin America because of how many different communities of Central and South American origin there are in that one city. So that was really cool. And we also got to learn more about the different social justice issues that are going on in Miami, the very wide wealth gap and issues of gentrification and just the different struggles that a lot of migrant communities were facing. And so that was a really important day for us to kind of be more grounded and to kind of recognize the long history predating our arrival there and some of the dynamics that we would probably see crop up in our work throughout the 8 weeks. This is a picture from one of the first days that we started working at our partner organizations. So we worked at Day Legal Aid, which is a firm that provides pro bono representation to indigent clients. And even though the organization didn't have a specific migrant focus, because of the demographics of the city and a lot of their clientele were also migrants. And so it was really cool because we got to understand the migrant experience, not just through a strictly immigrant context, but also through the context of the different issues that the firm worked on. So they had a domestic violence department, a guardianship department, child advocacy department. And so we got to see what those issues look like for migrants in Miami. And so the 2 people on the left are actually law students who were working at the organization as well. And then the 3 of us on the right, we're all with Duke Engage. And so it was really cool to see the kind of work that they were doing, the research they were doing. and being students from law schools in Miami and learning from them, as well as learning from the different departments that we worked in. I worked specifically in domestic violence. And so I got to sit in on a few client intakes. And so there's 2 or 3 that I sat in on, and they were all in Spanish. So it gave me an opportunity to practice my Spanish and make sure I could understand, what was being said, and I took notes. And it was really important for me to see like the experiences that a lot of migrants, in the US face, especially if they're in, have a vulnerable status, or, they don't have the support structurally to be able to address issues like domestic violence that are happening. And it just makes me a lot more vulnerable in situations like that. And so, being able to sit in on those client intakes and hear those stories was really important for me. And, in my perspective of like what the migrant experience is, there's so many different migrant experiences. So that was really like grounding and important for me to be able to experience. And, aside from the client intakes, I also go to court with another DukeEngage student, and we would sit in on cases. We got to meet a few attorneys and judges in the area. We went to lunch and learns, which is basically events that different law firms would host about a certain issue. So we went to one about human trafficking that was being hosted at another law firm, and like the issue of human trafficking, especially in Miami, as kind of like geographically, it's like a point where a lot of trafficking goes through. And so just learning about that issue and the advocacy that was being done to support survivors of that. So all very important work that was being done. And this is another lunch and learn that was actually hosted by our partner organization. On the very left is a local attorney and author, and to his right is a local judge. And so they had a facilitated conversation about their work and different issues going on in Miami. And so it was really cool to be able to meet with, people in the law sphere in Miami and kind of hear about, their personal experiences and like the advocacy work that they've done and kind of like the big takeaways that they've gotten from their work. So a big challenge that I had during my time at my partner organization was that I felt like I didn't have much to contribute. I was fresh out of my first year of undergrad, didn't know much about a lot, especially relating to the legal nuances of immigration. And so, it was very humbling to be like, okay, what can I do? What do I actually have to contribute? And, oftentimes, I would type up case notes or, redact information from certain files that the attorney that I was shadowing had. But, I would be very insistent about, what can I do to help? And so, I was given work whenever there was work to be done. And so this is one example. I just like made a flyer for an event that was being hosted by the law firm. And I actually ended up being kind of drafted by the Dade County Bar Association, which was on another floor of the same building, because they realized that, the law firm we were working at had interns that didn't really have anything to do. And so they kind of just like took me under their wing, and I helped them kind of like clean up their database and like update information they had for different law firms in Miami that were with the association. And so I think that experience taught me how to be flexible and to, do what I could, like, of course they know that, there's not a lot of like legal, experience that I can bring to as an intern, but whatever I could do within my means, I wanted to do it and help as much as I could. So yeah, that was like a struggle that I had, but ended up working out fine. And I got to talk to other people in the program who were also maybe having similar issues, and we got to kind of reflect together and support each other through that. Another thing that I did was the director of the law firm asked me to write a few articles about different things that I did throughout the summer. And so one article I wrote was about Miami Bridge, which is the only organization in Miami that provides housing for unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness. And so, kind of relating to what Nathan was talking about earlier, there's like a large unaccompanied youth population in Miami, but there's like nowhere near the amount of support needed to house them. And oftentimes what the issue is with unaccompanied youth is that the approach is often to reunite them with their families, but oftentimes they're either facing abuse within their family or they're LGBT, and it's a very harmful environment. And so reunification isn't always the best for that young person. But a lot of temporary shelters in Miami, like you have to have a mother or a parent with you, or the stay that you're able to have is only from like 60 to 90 days. And so a lot of youth are kind of like constantly cycling through, and they don't have any permanent permanent support, permanent shelter. And so I wrote about that that issue in that article. And I also talked about an experience I had going to immigration court. It was a very difficult experience to have. It was about 4 hours of sitting in court and seeing like basically 5-minute hearings that just kind of didn't give the migrants much autonomy or much voice. Oftentimes it was just their attorney that spoke for them, and they would make decisions without translating anything or really talking to the person that was in court for that day. And the person that we were there with would tell us how some people would travel like up to 4 hours from other cities in Florida, because the only immigration courts were, I think, in Orlando and Miami. And so they would travel for hours just to have this one hearing, and then it would end in 5 minutes, and then they would have to be scheduled for another hearing, sometimes like 6 months to a year later. And so it just really showed me how poorly our system addresses issues of migration. And it's just like for me, it was a very dehumanizing process to see firsthand. And it made me realize, because at this point I was considering law as a possible avenue to kind of do the advocacy work that I was passionate about. But I think it made me realize the limitations of the law, and how, often the law, especially around migration, is very politicized. And, like as an attorney, your hands are pretty much tied as it relates to what the current politics and policies are around migrants. And so, that kind of made me realize that law wasn't the avenue that I wanted to go down. I think that was really important for me. I think a lot of times having experiences, it's like, oh, this thing showed me how passionate I was and like how I want to go down this path. But I think it can be just as important to know what you don't want to do. And so I think this really made me realize that I didn't want to go into law. And I took a picture of this that was really cool. The law office did a little spread about us and put us in their office newsletter. And so I thought that was really cute. And they, well, we wrote it, but they printed it and we got to put in pictures and stuff. So that was really cool. And this picture is from towards the end of the program. We actually got a chance to visit Jupiter, Florida, which is where the hometown of one of our DukeEngage students. And so it was really cool to be able to, visit her hometown. We got to visit her family, and this lighthouse is kind of like the symbol of Jupiter. And one of my biggest takeaways from my experience with DukeEngage was the, friendships that I got from it. I think it was honestly the best group that I could have ever hoped for. They were all so, open, and we got very close very quickly. And they were all just so supportive. And it wasn't just like, oh, we hang out and have fun type thing, but we also were able to like reflect with one another. And we were facing issues and struggling, or just like, having kind of these existential crises about like, migration. And a lot of us were also like first generation, or, had immigrated to the US at a young age. And so it was a very personal topic for us. And so being able to process that and be in community with one another was so, so important. And so I'm like always grateful for that group. And I remain in contact with several of them. One of them graduated in 2018, and we're still very close and talk almost every day. So I'm, very happy that I was able to get that from this program as well. And this was a picture that I thought was really cute. And we entered it into like the photo find competition they had, and we got like the winning picture for immersion. So I thought I would put that in there. But yeah, DukeEngage was just a very incredible experience for me. I think it allowed me to be very critical of both myself and the program, and what it means to have, to be civically engaged, especially in a context that you're not from, a geographical context that you're not from. And it definitely informed kind of like the academic path that I decided to take. I wanted to do a combination of sociology and public policy because, I wanted to understand the systems and social dynamics that lead to injustices, and also have like, one path or one solution that I could, study about that could address these injustices, which is public policy. Like those, policies are directly affect people. And I saw that with the, immigration policies that were really harming a lot of migrant communities in Miami. And so having that combination of sociology and public policy, I thought would, really inform my academic experience and be something that I personally cared about. So yeah, like it definitely informed my academic path after my first year, and also like the friendships that I made, and kind of like the critical eye that I brought to, the different spaces that I was in were some really like, yeah, like it was really an impressionable experience for me. And it's something that, has allowed me to continue to work with DukeEngage. I became a guide my sophomore year, which is basically for Duke alums to continue working with DukeEngage on campus. And I'm doing it again this year. And also a deal at the end of my sophomore year. So I worked with the DukeEngage Academy and helped facilitate different sessions. And so definitely very much DukeEngage fan and continue working with DukeEngage. So it's definitely a very important experience, and that I will continue to keep with me. And I will pass it on to Hidil, who is our last student presenter.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Eritrea. That was an incredible presentation. I'm going to be talking about my DukeEngage experience in Jordan, and I will be mindful of time. But I remember attending one of these sessions as an incoming freshman, and they were extraordinarily helpful in understanding exactly what DukeEngage was about. And I can talk on and on about my program. I love it so much. I was one of those students that listed DukeEngage in my college application essay. So going into Duke, I knew that I wanted to participate in this program. So first, I'll talk about why I chose the program and how I chose the Jordan program in specific. I was gravitating towards Middle Eastern studies as a freshman. And so I knew that with that, I definitely needed some sort of experiential learning experience, and DukeEngage would be able to provide that for me. I knew the faculty director, Abdullah Antapli, who led my program, and I discussed with him about what the program would be like, and I found that that was the best fit for what I wanted to do. Additionally, I was taking Arabic classes, and like experiential learning and just being in the culture that where the language is spoken is so crucial for linguistic development. And so that is also another reason why I chose the Jordan program. So it just kind of fit all of my academic interests and my personal interests. And so in Jordan, it's structured a little bit differently than most DukeEngage programs. Each student can choose a partner organization to work with and participate in what effectively was an internship program. So I chose a legal aid organization that was called Justice Center for Legal Aid, and it was based in Amman, which is the capital of Jordan. And this organization is the largest legal aid organization in Jordan. They have over 21 clinics across the country, and they provide legal consultations and legal representation to poor and vulnerable people in the country. Going in, I came in as a bio global health major into Duke. I didn't know what I wanted to do for my career, but I found this organization extraordinarily compelling. They were extremely well developed and have really incredible values in terms of how they want to empower and uplift people out of poverty and vulnerable populations. And so I ended up choosing to work with them, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. Day to day, I would help them with research. I would research the criminal justice system in Jordan, in other countries for comparative analysis. I would help them develop and create reports that they could put on their website. And I would also help them with some grant applications too. So I was really able to do a lot. I learned so much from my supervisor and mentors. They were so incredibly helpful and hands-on, and they consistently wanted to teach me about the landscape in Jordan, about politics. We would constantly have really thought-provoking and meaningful discussions about everything from US politics back at home to what was going on in Jordan. And so I would definitely say being able to learn from my supervisors was an extraordinarily huge takeaway. They were very well established, very experienced, and I just learned a lot from them. So that was really incredible. And other students in my program had similar experiences. Some worked with environmental conservation groups, others worked with a micro fund that provided small grants to women. So we all really got to pick things that spoke to our interests and then dive deeper into them. And so through all of that, I would say a second huge takeaway would be really understanding how one can leverage the legal system in order to empower poor and vulnerable communities. The JCLA, which is the organization I work, additionally held awareness sessions where they reached about 3,600 vulnerable people in the year to teach them about the legal system and empower them to help themselves. And I think that was a really crucial aspect and an extremely deep learning process that I was only able to learn by actually working with a legal aid organization. I learned a lot about Jordan's history as well. The entire cohort took culture and language and history classes with our site coordinator in order to learn more about the context in which we were working with. And I think this is an extremely crucial part. You heard a lot of the students speak about how they were going to places that they had never been before. And so being able to learn more about the history of Jordan, about the demographics, the politics, and where we were working really enabled us to be more effective community partners and really assist the organizations that we were working with. In terms of how this DukeEngage experience influenced my life back at Duke, it was extraordinarily transformative. That solidified my interest in Middle Eastern studies. So I am a political science and international comparative studies major. I'm concentrating in the Middle East. I continued to take Arabic, and like I said, I was in a homestay program, so I was really able to practice my Arabic while I was in Jordan. My homestay family was incredible. They really helped me improve my language skills. And so, yeah, it definitely helped me professionally in that sense, professionally and academically, but also in terms of personal relationships. I met some of my best friends on the program. They were such incredible people. I don't think I would have met them otherwise. And we just shared life memorable experiences. I mean, they were just, I was going through and finding pictures for this presentation, and it just really took me back memory lane. I really hold those memories really fondly, and I loved my experience there. And so I still continue to talk to my supervisor. They've actually provided recommendations for me for various other internship and job applications. I still talk to my site coordinator and the faculty director. And so those relationships that you form during this program are so crucial, and they're long lasting, and they help you down the line. And so I think that's also a really crucial part of the program that they talk about. So yeah, I'm gonna share some pictures while I talk more about my experience. And let's put this. Give me one moment, sorry. Yeah, there we go. And so we actually, luckily enough, we had a photographer. As one of the students that was on our group is a photographer. So we actually have really incredible pictures from the program. This is Al Khazna, which means treasury in Arabic, and that's in Petra. It's one of the first excursions that we went on. So you heard from other students that all of the programs usually include excursions to learn more about the place we're working in. So we have these really incredible pictures from that excursion. It was about a 5 to 6 hour hike, very difficult, very long and hot, but super memorable. In that center picture, you can see our entire cohort, and it also has a picture of our faculty director here, Imam Abdullah Antapli, and our site coordinator. And these two people were really important. They really led the program, and they also ensured that we were continuously reflecting on our experience and getting what we wanted out of it. So that was really incredible. And these are pictures on the left. This was us in orientation. We took some survival Arabic classes at the very beginning of the program and then continued to take them throughout the 8 weeks. And we also had some history lessons and safety lessons and things like that. And on the right was us just exploring the city when we first got there. And this was in the desert, Wadi Rum. We met with a Bedouin community there and we shared tea with them. We shared some stories. It was extraordinarily memorable. We had some dinner, and then that night we just sat out in the middle of the desert and just watched the sky. On the right here, you can see the stars are, one of the students was able to take this incredible picture. It was just breathtaking and super, just, I will always never forget that night. And then on the left are my two supervisors from my organization. They both worked at the JCLA, and they were mentors. They were extremely helpful. They gave me so much advice, and I learned a lot from them. And so that was one of the last few days I was there. And then on the left here is the Citadel, which is in Amman. It's a historical site. On the right is Mount Nebo. These were also part of our excursions. So you can see that in addition to working, in addition to being immersed in the culture with homestays, we also took excursions. So we really, really got to know the country. On the left were my homestay parents. They also were, I just miss them so much. I still talk to them over WhatsApp. They're super, super sweet. And they really, I got to speak in Arabic with them and really hone down on my language skills. And yeah, they were just super supportive. And on the right is a picture of a mosque and people praying. And here's some more pictures from some excursions. On the left is Qais, and in the back, you can actually see parts of Syria and the Golan Heights. On the left here is a picture of us with one of the students in our cohort. Her homestay sister was actually getting married, and so she invited all of us to the wedding. So you can really see we got really close to the people that we met there, and it was an extremely fun event, and it was fun to see a Jordanian wedding. And on the right, is also a really important and cool event that I got to go to. I am Sudanese American, and during the time I went to DukeEngage, it was in June and July of 2019, which is coincided with the Sudanese revolution. And so the Sudanese diaspora in Jordan got together and held this event in celebration of the revolution. And I got to attend that and meet other Sudanese people from a different part of the diaspora, which is really incredible and something that I never thought I would have while in Jordan. Yeah, and then this was in one of the ruins in Jebba in Jordan, in Jeffra, excuse me. And so we got to take a tour of that. We had a tour guide who explained the history of the site and the archaeology. And yeah, those are all of the pictures that I have. And that was my experience. Thank you so much. And I will hand it back to Inga.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you families for sticking with us. I know we're over time, but I think I can answer a couple of questions. I know that the biggest one is that people want to know what's happening with us this summer. And unfortunately, my answer to that is I don't know. What I do know is that the Duke travel which has been restricted up until this point. I heard this week the restriction's going to hold through spring, and so that means that I'm not really sure what's going to happen this summer. I do understand from them that they're not going to make a distinction between domestic travel and international travel as they're making their decision about restricting it. Which would mean that we won't know probably until some point in the spring what, if any, in programs we're going to be able to run. We are certainly hoping to be able to run some. I'm guessing if that happens, they will be domestic programs. But we are also putting together working with program directors to think about virtual opportunities again. And those opportunities may actually include students living together in Durham so that they can still have an immersion experience and working on projects with their community partners remotely. That's really all I know at this point. Evan, was there anything else you?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I just realized I was on mute. I've been, you know, Zoom errors. But I just want to say thank you, Inga, and thank you to all the students. I believe most of the questions in here were related to, I do see one in here actually that's not related to summer 2021. Do you offer DukeEngage in Russia?
There is actually a hybrid program. It's really our only hybrid program. We've had it since almost the very beginning, that is for students who are studying Russian. So for more information about that, you can look on our website under our programs. We do have a description from last year.
Great. Well, I think to just thank you to everyone, and not only just speaking for Inga, but I think just Duke in general. I mean, we'll have to everything right now. We're sort of on a daily, if not weekly, basis for trying to figure things out. So things are definitely subject to change. We're hoping that eventually, more about DukeEngage and just travel in general will open up, but it's just to be determined. But thank you to everyone today for joining. This has been wonderful. Lots of great pictures and stories shared. And have a good rest of your day. Thank you.